Thank you very much, Michelle, and thank you everyone for joining our session here today. And we're going to talk about why we should talk less about innovation and why we should look at these approaches to innovation differently than what many of us actually been doing for many years now. Some of you might already know what I do, but I see myself as an author, speaker, and strategic advisor, and I'm moving more and more towards what I call corporate transformation based on disruption, digitalization, and innovation. And I'm actually starting what I call a movement here. It's a bit bold, but go in and check out transformordie.com and join me in this journey here. And I would also like to offer to all of you today, the company's organization, to have a free session for your company organization this summer. Travel costs to be covered, but if you like some of the things we talk about here today, get in touch and we'll see what we can arrange. Let's get started, because I see 4 global megatrends drive business today, and the first one is something that I think we can all agree upon, that everything just moves faster. The same with the second one, that everything will be connected. And just in this second one here, it's not just about people and companies being connected, it's also about devices will start being connected in a much higher level and scale than what we've ever seen before. The third one, knowledge is transparent, and that is why I want to go back to Startup Bootcamp in Istanbul, because knowledge is something that is all over the place, and it's much more accessible than ever before. And when I say it's transparent, I mean it by the sense that if you look at startups and the VC community, venture capital community, if a startup, for instance, in Startup Bootcamp Istanbul get funded by €1 million, the entire VC community globally will have some idea what happened just 2 weeks after this funding took place. You will have an idea what's happening, why investors are having these, investing in these areas, and others will follow soon. There's just so much transparency in these things right now. The kicker is that the startups and the VCs, they're very fast on acting on this transparent knowledge. Big companies are not. They're actually very, very slow, and that's something we need to change if big companies are going to keep up in this innovation entrepreneurship game. And the last point, I'm going to elaborate on that later on, is that disruption will hit harder and faster than ever before. But let me get back to one of the key themes first, and as you could see, this webinar is titled Stop Talking About Innovation, and I'm actually backtracking a little bit because I started working more on this 6-8 months ago because I've just been in so many engagements, interactions, and conversations where I can see that companies are doing a pretty bad job on making innovation work, and they do a horrible job on creating what's called an innovation culture. And I started to look into why is this happening? Why do we not have more success? What could the reasons be for all those failures? And I honestly believe that we can get better results if we talk less about innovation and if we start rethink our approaches to this one. And communication is a big element here, but so is perception. And one of the kickers I got, one of the reasons I really started thinking about this one, I was walking down the streets in New York, and you see these advertisements here. I think it was even on 5th Avenue, just walking down the street, and I just stopped, and I said, oh, no, stop, please. This is just too much now. It has to be different. And I just looked at this advertisement, and then I just said, oh, no. And in this situation, I cannot do it with you guys in an interactive way, but I kind of ask you for your help to help me remind why I didn't like this one at all. The one thing here that really bothers me is up in the right corner. It says designing innovation since 1938. Designing innovations. I mean, what the heck does it mean? What does designing innovation mean? And I mean, if you take the really simple case of how to explain what you do, I would take my mother. She's now 70, and she doesn't always fully understand what it is I do. So you work with innovation, and she doesn't really understand what it is. If she were working here, I mean, she would look at this poster and say, oh, so you do suitcases. No, Mom, I don't do suitcases. And I can ask you the same guy, a similar question, guys, and that is, so if your companies do not make suitcases, then you are not innovative, because it says on this poster here, designing innovations equals suitcases. And that is the problem with the word innovation. The term innovation is that when you get into a close circle of people who work with this on a daily level, and I would say the majority, if not all of the people in this webinar session here today, we know what innovation means. Yes, we might have different definitions, understanding of what it is, but we kind of have an overall understanding, we have an overall language, a common understanding of language on what it means. Where it becomes difficult and outright dangerous is when you go out to your organization. If it has 2,000, 10,000, 50,000 people, you can be very sure that many of these people have very different opinions of what innovation is than you have. And companies over and over fail to create this common language, common understanding of what it is. And this takes me to my next point. If companies keep failing on developing a common language, common understanding on innovation, how can they have the audacity to think they can create something called an innovation culture? How can we create a culture around a word that is so badly misunderstood and also overused and misused in so many ways? So we need to be much more careful about how we use the word innovation. And in this webinar, I will give you some ideas on what we can do instead. And it is based on going back to basics in some ways. Let me move on from here. And moving on means that I will share some of the things I see on innovation, transformation, and business in general today. And one of them is that we had this term called the front end of innovation for many years now. And this used to be the most important part of our corporate innovation efforts. And yes, I will mention innovation a lot. And remember, I said that we need to talk less about innovation. I backtrack from stop talking about innovation because I also realized that the word and the term innovation itself is here to stay. But I really urge you to never ever use the word or term innovation culture again. But when we're going to look at the front end of innovation, getting ideas and working with them in the early stages is the easier part, and now the execution is what really matters. You can call this the back end of innovation. And we've begun this transition phase. And just to give you an example, I mean, we all know the company Starbucks, and most of us tasted their coffees. Few of us have been at mystarbucksidea.com. But when you go in and look at this one, it dims to you that ideas are everywhere, suggestions are everywhere. Over the course of the last 5 years, Starbucks has collected more than 500,000 ideas and suggestions on this website. 500,000. It's an insane amount of input they're getting here. However, this is more crowdsourcing for marketing purposes, less than innovation, and it's seen in the implementation rate. It's something like 0.0014%. It still tells us a very good example of how ideas are everywhere. And if you go into your organization and ask your employees, you will have plenty of ideas. If you still feel you have some difficulties getting plenty of qualified ideas, it's so easy to go external as well. So the execution is what really matters today. Don't focus so much on ideas. Focus on how you can execute on the right ideas that you already have in place. Another interesting thing I see out here now is that the role of the CTO, the Chief Technology Officer, has changed, because the value itself is not just created around a product or technology anymore. You could actually argue that you could do quite well even with a good enough product or technology, and then you can build out some top-class services, process, and business model around this one. If you manage to do this, you can still be very successful in what you do. And this also means that internal power has started to shift away from products and technology focus to service, process, and business model as well. Of course, this is much more prevalent in companies that are centered around technologies and products. Getting back to this thing about disruption, well, I always say that you cannot plan for disruptive or radical innovation, but you can be sure you will be disrupted. It's somewhat amusing. I've seen many cases, I've been in many situations where a senior executive have kind of said and almost outright ordered that I would like to see this business unit bring out 2 or 3 disruptive or radical products or services within the next 2 years. And it just tells us that that person do not really know what he or she is talking about, because you cannot order innovation like that. At best, you can create the right framework, the right conditions for this to happen. And then you can cross your fingers because luck and timing are some of the key elements for bringing out disruptive or radical innovation. But the thing about disruption is that if you cannot order it, you can be 100% certain that you will be disrupted. I'm seeing so many signs that any industry, any company in the next 2 or 3 years will be disrupted in some way or another, either on the core of what they're doing or around the services, process, or business models of what they're doing. And this actually brings us to some important consideration with regards to disruption. And before I get into this one, I would like to point out the things about Tesla as a case, because Tesla, you can argue, is not necessarily disruptive because it brought out an electric car. I mean, Tesla is not the first company to bring out a car, but it's the first one to bring out an electric car in the luxury segment. And it really got the German companies, or the German luxury automakers, to scratch their heads and see what's going on here. And you might even argue, well, it's still just an electric car, just in the luxury segment. What's so radical about this? Then you can go and look at how Tesla is starting to change how you sell cars. You sell them online without dealership. That's a radical thing. Maybe not on the product itself, but definitely on the processes and the services around this one. And how about having the first updatable car? Well, you just wake up in one morning and then you have a car that can park itself, and it's all happening just by a software update. That's some pretty radical things in the car industry. So I think Tesla's a good example of a company that can bring out disruption. And one of the reasons I also mentioned is actually not because of the cars. But if you look at the box up there, you can see in the left corner there's a white box with Tesla on it. And no, it's not a charger. It's actually a place where you can store energy. So imagine you have solar cells on your house, and that means that you can take the energy from your solar cells, solar panels, and you can store it and use it later on. And suddenly, just like this, because Tesla's working on a platform on electricity, they not only have the electric cars, but they're also getting into a very important game, which is how can we create a better energy grid, and how can we go in and store energy in better ways. So you can argue that Tesla is quite unpredictable and also quite radical in the things they bring into market. I have some interaction with Tesla, and I really like what they're doing and try to create a new culture, a new way of doing things, because when it comes to bring out radical innovation, we focus way too much on the market approach itself. And yes, of course, we need to figure out how to bring this to market and how to make it work in the market, but we often forget that what's the real big obstacle for success with radical disruptive innovation is actually the internal setups. You'll often see companies will hack a toe or hack a heel because it has to fit into the current processor, the current setup, the current resources that you already have in place. And that means that you start to adapt what really looks like a cool, interesting product or services to the company rather than the market. And if we're not able to separate the two, I mean, focus on the market and what the market really needs, separate that from what the organization, your own organization, need and will work the best with, you will end up with something in between that you'll not be able to bring to the market. So have in mind that the internal setup and the internal barriers are actually what can stop what could have been a radical innovation. So you can say that you actually need an offensive as well as a defensive approach here as well. That's what I mean, that you cannot predict, you cannot say that we will bring out disruptive innovation as a company, but you could be 100% certain that you will be disrupted, and you need to get ready for that. Focus on corporate transformation. Well, I do this today, and I've put this on 3 pillars: disruption, digitalization, and innovation. And I've started this initiative where you can check out Transform or Die, because I really believe that companies will die if they're not starting already today on this journey of adapting and transforming themselves. We will see so many companies pass away over the next 3, 5, 7 years. And more interestingly, we're going to see a whole generation of executives who's going to be replaced in big numbers in the next 3, 5, 7 years. people who understand what's happening based on disruption, digitalization, and innovation. Many of the people in the room today, I can tell you, you will have so many interesting opportunities, and that will lead your careers to more senior executive positions in the coming years. It's very much challenging times, but it's also very interesting times for those of us who understand these things. But why does transformation actually matter? Stay relevant, survive, and prosper. And some years ago, we had Creative Destruction, an interesting book that had some studies about the lifespan of top companies, and the tenure for average firm on the Standard & Poor's 500 actually went down to 18 years in 1980. And today we're talking that the tenure, the time a company stays on a Fortune 500 or Standard & Poor's 500 list is only about 12 years. That means within 12 years, you will become less relevant than you are today, and you might even be on the brink of extinction if you do not transform or morph your company into new things. It's happening that fast today, and that is quite mind-boggling because most companies are operating at too slow a speed to be able to manage this. And what I would urge you to is, again, talk less about innovation and more about transformation. It could be viewed as a new buzzword, but that is the best I can do now. It's still work in progress, and if you have some inputs and thoughts and ideas and all these things, I'm more than happy to listen to you and work with you on this. And when I talk about transformation, I would like you to go on and focus on the corporate values that you already have in place, and I would like you to focus on the basics of simply just getting things done. And we're starting to see some interesting inspirational cases on how to do this, and surprisingly enough, some of them are coming from China. Hire is a different kind of company that's really been viewed and reviewed in Harvard Business Review for the many case studies, and they keep reinventing themselves. And I think that's something we could look into. And my favorite example right now is GE. And you can read the text here, although it's a bit small, but it's really transforming itself to become the world's premier digital industrial company. It's always been viewed as one of the premier industrial companies in general, but now it's really striving to become the premier digital company, and there's a huge challenge in this, but they're also doing some quite interesting things. They have something called the Predix platform, which is the underlying systems for them to manage this transition, and they're actually going to sell this as a product too. So I expect us that we'll hear a lot about this Predix system and software in the coming months and years. They also have some processes in place, and it's built on the book Lean Startup by Eric Ries, and this is what they call fast works, and I've done some studies on this and had some interactions on this with GE, and it's quite interesting and fascinating on how they put up a process to move things faster, and not only on the product and service development side, but also on the transformation of the company itself. And here you can see the 5 points that they're working with. So if you also take a little look at digital, I have some trouble with all this talk about digital transformation, because most of the times I hear about this, or when I read articles around the world, I see that it's more about how you can create a better website, how you can create a better social media presence, or how you can do even better on e-commerce. And yes, those things are relevant and they are important to many companies. But this is not where we're going to see the big impact, the big changes. This is when we start looking into 3 simple letters, IoT. And people who understand what's going to happen in the future will know that this is Internet of Things. And Internet of Things, in a very, very short version, is how we're going to connect devices with each other. We're going to put more sensors into our devices and our products and technologies. So we're going to be able to track a lot of things. We're going to be able to generate a ton of data, and we're going to be able to look into this and change value chains and supply chains for it. And One good example would be farming. What will happen with the farming industry when you look at from the farmers when they start to get much better ways of surveying how they grow their crops because of sensors in the ground and in the air and everywhere around it. And even the same IoT sensors and devices when it's about bringing the crops and the produce to the processing plants, where they will also have lots of information being developed there. And the same when we get to retail chain. I mean, it's going to change everything when you know so much about the products and service you have that it could even push where you make the most money in this value chain. So everything's going to change in an industry like farming across the whole value and supply chain here, and it's going to happen in almost any industry in the future. So we need to get into IoT into a big way. Personally, I like to go to Silicon Valley as often as possible, and I spent quite some time there. And one of the most giving places I like to go to is a place called Plug and Play Accelerator. And I had some good interaction with their digital team there. And how do you actually get to learn the best possible way about digital transformation based on the Internet of Things? And I like the response, which is you have to look at the startups, because that's where it's all happening right now. And then it's spilling over to large organizations. So that's something I would urge you, go to Silicon Valley and get an idea of how they deal with transformation in that place, and especially based on the startups. It's not enough that we just go in and look at how we can change and transform on the products and services. The organizational structures we have today will not fit the future. Just look at the number of freelancers we're having today. Look at how we engage with open innovation. It's going to change how we structure companies. It's also going to take forever for organizations to make these changes, and many companies will die because of it. We need to see some new structures, and not only from startups who have the luxury of being able to create the structures from the beginning and build the values from the beginning. We need to go in and look at companies that are decades old, 50, 100 years old. They need to change their structures as well. We do not have much experimentation here at all, and that is one of the problems. If you don't experiment on our organizational structures, we don't know what's going to work, and it's just keep us on the status quo. Zappos is doing some interesting things on a concept called holacracy, which is about removing all managers and go in and let the employees create their own circles who should decide what needs to get done within the company. It's quite radical, and there's some mixed reviews on this one, and we're not sure how it's going to work out yet. But again, the experimentation is happening, and it's going to be a goldmine of lessons and insight for those willing to learn and understand based on this. And what I like about it is that Zappos is not a huge company, but it's not a startup either. It has about 1,500 people working on these things. And that means you're trying to do this in a company that's already more than a decade old, that's already set in stone when it comes to its culture. And even though that culture is more radical than most of yours, they are trying to change it. How to make this happen in a large organization like this, it's very interesting to look into. So that's another point that I would give you. If I were to boil this down, what I just talked about for the last 15 minutes, I would say it's very much about organizations do 4 things very well. They listen much better to markets. And this goes back to the increasing transparency of knowledge. You need to listen better. You need to find out how to listen and listen to the relevant things. And then you need to do the second thing, which is to adapt to the input you get and do that much faster than what you do today. Experimentation is a big problem because when you experiment, first of all, you do not know what the outcomes are. You kind of lose control, and that's not something managers and many executives like to do. And even worse, probably 8 out of 10 times when you do some kind of experimentations, you will fail. And well, managers, especially executives, do not like failures either. And that means they'll try to rather keep the status quo because we know it's working, or at least it's been working in the past. We're not so sure it's going to work in the future, and that's where the problem is. We need more experimentation on all levels of the organization. And then you need to execute better than your competitors. And by executing is the basic things. I mean, how you run your business has to be sharper and better than what your competition do. And I would put out the thesis that if you really execute better than your competition, you would like anything to be as open as possible, because the more input you can get, the more insight you can get, share with everyone, and if everyone else did it, the winners will be those who execute the best. And that actually brings me to the next point, which is open innovation, because you should embrace open innovation regardless of what kind of company you have today. But if you are a leading company in the sense of executing better than your competition, you need to go all in on this one. And open innovation or external collaboration, when I'm pressed to define this one, it's important for me to say this is much more about a philosophy or mindset that you should embrace within an organization. It's not a process that you can go to McKinsey and just buy. That's also why it's so difficult to implement, but you need to look into this one. And I will just go back a few slides here, because this is one of my favorite quotes right now. And how do you actually get started with all these things? I would say go all in on digital and experiment on how you can go in and make your company as digital as possible. And this will bring you so many challenges and problems. But when you go in and set out and overcome these challenges and obstacles, you will also change your organization. You'll have to fire people. You have to get new people on board, you'll have to experiment, and you have to fail a lot and learn from it. But going all in on digital will really help you make a difference in how you operate. And when you do so, I really think it's important to look at this quote here from Bud Cadell, and that is, there's no digital strategy, but just strategy in a digital world. And it sounds almost like the same, but the difference is profound. And when you get this, when you understand this difference, you're in a good setting, and then you need to get your executives on board for this as well. Something I've seen over and over again is that the people I engage with, corporate innovation teams or executives around this, transformation teams as well, they're not good enough communicators. You need to become much better communicators in this era we have right now. And what I would say here is that if you really want to change the perception inside your organization, go in and transform the organization, the outside voice is the most important one here. And an example here would be that you are working with your colleagues and you discuss your colleagues and you think that you're doing so what you're doing. Your company have some good pockets where you do some really great things, but you also know that you still have lots of challenges. But imagine that you have Financial Times going to do an article about your company. It comes out on a Friday, and it really focuses on some of those pockets of opportunities, those pockets where you're doing really well on innovation and transformation. So it's a glowing article, and it's really a great appraisal of your company, and you can look at this and say, well, I can see where they're going, but this is not the entire truth of our company. It's not as good as it looks like. But when you go out there on the Friday and you meet with your friends for a beer Friday late afternoon, and they tell you, hey, that's a great article, man, that's a cool place to work, you kind of look at them and say, well, it's not really like this, so let's just tone it down a little bit. When you meet your friends for some leisure activities or your family, and they've also read this article on the Saturday, you hear the same thing. And when you meet with your in-laws on the Sunday, you hear the same thing again. And when you keep hearing the outside world telling you you're actually doing some things pretty well, when you get back to work on Monday, your mindset has changed too. And that means it's going to be easier for your organization to move forward. So communication has to go both on the internal side but also on the external side. And interesting enough, if you really want to make internal changes, you have to change the perception from the outside. I I like one company, again, going back to GE and what they're actually doing in these things. They have very much been viewed as this quite dusty industrial company, and now they're trying to go digital. And they really understand they need to communicate about this, not only to convince everyone outside the organization, but in particular also inside the organization, and also to recruit the right kind of talent. And I just want to show you and a short video here, which I really like because of the many underlying messages it brings aboard. So just listening in, I'm afraid the video itself might be a little bit bumpy, but the sound should be fine and you should be able to capture it. So let's listen.
You heard you got a job as a developer.
It's official. I work for GE.
What? Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Guys, I'll be writing a new language for machines, so planes, trains, even hospitals can work better. It's just, oh.
Sorry, I was trying to put it away.
Got it on the case.
So you're going to work on a train?
Not on a train, on trains.
You're not going to develop stuff anymore?
No, I am. Do you know what GE is? This is huge for me. I'm thrilled.
Yeah, no.
Oh, yeah. No, you should be. Yeah.
Awesome.
Great.
Going to be a pilot, fly a plane?
They've made a series of videos like this, and I just love them because it's really about changing perceptions inside and outside the organization, and it fits well with what they're trying to do with their transformational effort right now. If we move on a little bit, I'd like to get you to think differently about communication today, because yes, it's traditional communication. It can be internal with internets, it can be websites, it's PR, it's branding activities, but it's also important that we view communication in the context of what we talk about here as stakeholder management and networking. There are so many internal, external stakeholders you need to win over, and that's also communication. You need to improve your skills on this one. And then it's also social media. And as I said in the beginning here, too many of you guys working on these things need to upgrade your skills and mindset here. And those of you who have the skills on communication and you also have a good understanding of what's happening on transformation and innovation issues, you have some interesting job opportunities in the coming years. So I said upgrade mindset and skills just before, and let's move on this one on the people side, because one of the mantras I have is that it has to be people first, process next, and then ideas, because the key for execution is people. And yet we'll see over and over again that companies are very good at developing some kind of project systems, project management systems, where they say we have 10 ideas in the early phase, you can call discovery phase, and then you have 15 in incubation phase and 8 in acceleration phase. So they're very good at kind of tracking the ideas they have in different stage gauge processes or similar, but they don't really put too much emphasis on the people. And again, what I would like to say is that you need different people at different stages, and in other words, it says you need to have the right people for the right project at the right time in the right context. In this situation, discovery, incubation, acceleration. So I often go out there and work with companies and interact with them and challenge them on why do you have so much focus on your ideas and your projects and how to manage those when you have so little focus on the people side of this one. And I ask them questions like, have you identified and developed the right people for the different phases of these projects? And they kind of say, well, not really, it's just something that comes after you got the projects. And I asked them, if you got these project pools, why do you not build people pools as well? So you much easier and much faster can go in and match the right people with the right projects. I would very much like to see companies do this. Unfortunately, I don't see much of it. And one of the reasons is a bit scary, because we can always agree that people is the key element for transformation, innovation, the things we're talking about here today. And yet we see that HR, the human resource function, is almost totally absent in these discussions. You never hear about them. You don't see them at conferences. I don't get to engage with them when I work with the corporate innovation team. I don't know where they are. I mean, you need different mindsets, different skills for the future, and you need HR to identify what's needed for your organization and work with senior executives on these things and getting the right people on board. But you don't see HR in these discussions, and that's a bit scary, and that's something we definitely need to change. And going back to the skills, the things that we need here, I'll just stop talking for 20 seconds and then you can get an idea of what I would like to look into. 10 things here. Take a look. And by the way, I'm coming to an end pretty short, so if you have any questions, comments or reflections, shoot them off, and Michelle will read them out to me and we can address this shortly. So questions, start typing and get them moving. I will move on here in the presentation, and I will actually do this quite simply with the last slide, which is about why this is important. It's a short story. And this is something that speaks in volumes about what we need to focus on. So when I entered this one, I really like how I always see a great number of people smiling or laughing when they read this, and I'm sure some of you have done this as well here. And this is actually the end of my talk here. And I know I touched on many things. I had many messages, and that is in some ways how it just is right now. I mean, there's so many things you need to know about and have an idea about and how to embed these things in how you do business today. I could take probably 8 or 10 of these topics and we could do a much sharper, much more specialized session just in these things here. But I wanted to give you more taster, some inspiration on what could happen. And you're more than welcome, if we don't get to cover your questions afterwards, to get in touch, shoot me an email and see if I can help you. And as I said, also, as the courtesy to Hype Innovation, a good partner of mine, for their clients in our network, if one of your organizations, companies are interested, I will have 1 free sessions this summer. So we will move over to questions now, Michelle, and will you take over there?
Absolutely. We got a couple of questions already. So one came in pretty early from Rikus. So what are the other options if we do not call it innovation? I think you were talking about transformation back then, right?
That's correct, Michelle. I mean, that's the one I'm working on right now. The risk is that transformation becomes just another buzzword because it's difficult to do the sessions as this without throwing out so many buzzwords used all the time. I mean, innovation, disruption, I mean, we hear them over and over again, and transformation could be another one. But I think that transformation is something that's more overarching than just innovation, and I can share why I actually started to look into this topic of corporate transformation. It was in a large part because of the work I've done on open innovation. I've written several books on this topic and worked on this in about 9 years, 9 years now. And what I saw is the companies that became more and more mature with open innovation, I usually look at this in 3 phases, the first, second, and third stage. The first stage, first level is where we kind of ask, what is open innovation and why is this even important for us? And lots of companies are still in this level. And the second one is that, okay, we understand why this is important and we've been doing this for some years. How can we do it even better? And the third and the most mature one is where it just becomes part of your organization, just part of doing things. But when some more companies get into the second stage here, what I saw was that being more transparent within your organization and being more open to key elements, and in order for them to become more transparent and more open and go beyond just a product or technology or just a challenge, you have to involve the entire organization. And being more open, being more transparent, while you did this throughout your business units and throughout your business function, I could see the transformation was taking place within this organization. They're starting to develop a different kind of mindset, and you could see the people that were in charge of these open innovation, external collaboration activities early on will be moved more and more into the center of the action. They're starting to get executive position and starting to get more and more responsibility. So I kind of see that innovation will, when it's really happening the right way, will become more of a transformation project because it becomes so encompassing of so many different things. And that's actually also where it starts to become meaningless to talk about innovation because it gives us even more definition of what it is. So a long answer, but transformation is what I'm using right now.
Great, thanks. And then we got another one from Catherine here. So she says, you stated to not use the term innovation culture. I'm curious, I'm working with large stagnant organizations. In order to encourage innovation, I'm working on the premise that the attitude of the employees must welcome change, both inside out and outside in opportunities. So to be prepared to seize opportunities, if not innovation culture change, what would then be the option?
I mean, in the question itself, you kind of hinted on it because taken out, but besides the beginning, you didn't really mention innovation as such here. You said about creating an organization to be better prepared for change. What if you took the challenge you have, what you're trying to do, and describe that in ways where you didn't use the word or term innovation a single time? What kind of language would that create? It would be, in my view, become much stronger. And the best example I've seen so far is the city of Dubai. If you know the United Arab Emirates, which is the federal, and then you have the city of Dubai, which is like a city-state by itself as well. When you go to the UAE and when you go to Dubai, you see the word innovation everywhere. I mean, the government is so much in love with the word and the term innovation that it's too much, to be honest. I really like the things they're doing down there. They have some very progressive thinkers and they're executing fairly well as well. But you see too much of the word innovation. So I was doing a session for the city of Dubai, and I went in there, and as preparation, I find the future plan for Dubai, the 2021 plan for Dubai, the city. And when I started going through this document, I was flipping. It was on a web page, along lots of pages there. I just went through from one page. I went through the entire site, and I was just curious and really impressed because the document didn't mention the term or the word innovation one single time. And to me, it was just so much more clear language. It was so much easier for me to understand what we were doing. They could very well and very easily have plastered the word innovation probably 50 to 100 times in this document, but they didn't do so. And then it became a much stronger communication tool. And this is kind of what also means, why not go back to basics? I mean, I also dug out some important documents from the history of Apple about 40 years ago. And when you go and look at those things, I mean, they managed to create a very interesting company at that time, 40 years ago, without mentioning the word innovation. They did a few times because it's just starting to take off. But we've been able to do great things without using the word innovation. And when we try to go and create what we think is the innovation culture in an organization, try to take away the word in what you're trying to do, use it as an exercise and see what happens. That would be the advice I would get right now.
Great. And then we got a question from Pat here. Do you recommend that an implementation team which is totally separate from the main company is created, or must it fully integrate into the company?
It's important to separate between, for instance, for open innovation, some companies go in and create an open innovation team, which is the one that's going to handle open innovation, external collaboration, more or less forever. And then you have what you can call an advanced team. An advanced team is someone who goes out there and becomes the pioneers and the ambassadors for what you try to do, but they become more like facilitators and integrators in order to make this happen. You should have teams like that, because if you really want to go in and bring in open innovation, external collaboration, really want to transform your organization, you have at some point to do this across the entire organization, all business units, all functions, in order to really fulfill the full potential. So you can have what I call advanced teams, but they must be very much prepared to go in and actually become more facilitators and integrators to get this across the organization.
Great. Then we have a question from Kareem. Do you know about any bottom-up corporate disruption initiatives? We think about a new project ownership model based on contribution and about introducing a complementary currency to enable collaboration beyond the silos. So the question is, do you know any corporate disruption initiatives that come from bottom-up?
Well, I've heard some things about Qualcomm in San Diego had something, a Flux program. I've heard about how they actually created this from the bottom up. It was the employees, so they didn't really have much resource on this one, and they kind of did it by themselves. It's actually been a long time ago, but we used to hear a lot about the word and the term skunk works, which kind of implied that you did things while you didn't even have the permission to do so. So there would be some example on this one. But Qualcomm is one that's actually on presentation, on the innovation presentation circuits, have talked about things like this one. So that would be the one that comes to my mind the most. And what we're seeing in the younger companies is that it doesn't really come from the bottom up because it's just the way they do things. I mean, it's been much more driven by every employee in the organization. Everyone can contribute in different ways. They focus on getting things done, and they know how to do incremental things, and they will have specific initiatives to go in and do more in between innovation and maybe some moonshots and radical attempts, but they do it because of the culture they have. The person who posted the question is welcome to shoot me an email. I'll try to dig more into this one and see if I can help you find some more cases.
Great, thanks. So that's it for now. Kareem, let me just add for this to this. Our client Liberty Global is just a role model regarding these bottom-up strategies, and we just have finished a deep dive case study with them. It's 24 pages or so, just with the comms department for our final approval. Should be out any day now, and I'll make sure you get it as soon as as we get the final go, basically. Great, that's it for now, it seems. Any questions left? We still got 10 minutes in case you have anything you would still like to ask.
If not, you're more than welcome to just get in touch. Shoot me an email. I'll try to help you. And if you just hear from Michelle, Hype has a ton of knowledge and insights, and they can definitely help you in different ways too.
Great, so seems like that's, there's another one. Can you talk a bit more about people innovation with product and process innovation from Thomas?
Oh, I would have to kind of ask what you mean by people innovation, because my thesis is that people is the drivers, the key elements of transformation and innovation, and I usually separate more in between products and technologies, which is what you can call more traditional R&D driven. But what we're seeing where the most value is being created today is more when you have the products and technologies, and then what you go in and do around the services, the processes, and the business models. That's where you can make the real big changes. Tesla being an interesting example of how they actually work with the dealerships or no dealerships in this case, and direct sales channels. So that would be my comment on that.